They filled my well with concrete. That's right, my own private, fully permitted, and expertly constructed well was treated like a toxic waste dump that posed a threat to their cookie-cutter paradise. At the very center of this whole fiasco was Meredith Sloan, the HOA president, equipped with a clipboard and a deity complex, smiling as if she had just saved the neighborhood from the scourge of independent thought. She termed it a necessary precaution. I term it a declaration of war. And I'm not one to lose wars, particularly not to weaponized pettiness in yoga pants. Allow me to take you back 6 months to explain how this entire nightmare started. I had recently relocated to Riverside Heights after selling my consulting startup, settling into a lovely community of 50 homes situated in the Colorado Springs foothills. I purchased my $800,000 house with cash, free of any mortgage, because I was seeking a tranquil life to concentrate on my freelance engineering projects. You see, I am a civil engineer specializing in water and drainage systems for resorts and high-end developments. Following 8 years at a huge corporation, enduring countless meetings and micromanagement, I chose to go freelance. It was the best decision I ever made. I was earning a 6-figure income, working half the time, and designing systems that truly made a difference. The first project I undertook was to build the perfect well for myself. This wasn't just any well. It was intended to be my engineering marvel, a testament to everything I had learned about sustainable water systems. I constructed that well as a statement of self-sufficiency. Its water was purer than the city's supply, and it was as beautiful as a piece of art. At night, LED lights cast a cool blue glow, and an automated control panel monitored the water quality continuously. The granite rim captured the daylight perfectly, and after dark, it resembled something from a luxury resort. I had resided in numerous places and worked on multi-million-dollar projects, but I had never truly owned something that was mine alone. This well, which I had dug, designed, and installed with my own hands, was the first thing that belonged entirely to me. It embodied all my values: innovation, self-reliance, and the commitment to doing things correctly, even at a higher cost. Standing beside it, holding a cold glass of the purest water I had ever tasted, I felt as if I had finally found my place in the world. That was when I first encountered Meredith Sloan. She appeared at my doorstep 3 days after I completed the well, holding a welcome basket with expensive cookies and wearing makeup and an outfit that screamed, "My primary occupation is worrying about my neighbor's opinions." At 42, she was recently divorced from a high-profile Denver lawyer and had used her $2.5 million settlement to purchase the most expensive home in our community. What I was unaware of then was that Meredith was accustomed to being the focus of attention. She was the queen bee who organized charity functions and social clubs during her time as a trophy wife. The loss of that status in a very public and messy divorce had left her with a desperate need to control something, anything, to reclaim a sense of power. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she stated, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Meredith, your HOA president. I simply had to see this incredible well everyone is discussing." She circled it slowly, her expression transitioning from curiosity to something uncomfortably close to envy. "Are you an architect?" she inquired, clearly impressed in spite of herself. "Civil engineer," I corrected, opening the monitoring app on my phone to show her the real-time water quality data. "I design water systems for resorts and luxury developments. This one utilizes advanced filtration technology. The water it produces is 10 times cleaner than the city's." I was genuinely enthusiastic about sharing my work, especially with a neighbor who appeared to be interested. But then, her demeanor shifted entirely. "Oh, that's interesting," she said, her voice adopting a cooler tone. "You know, here in Riverside Heights, we highly value simplicity and harmony with the community." The first alarm bell sounded in my mind. "Harmony with nature is a positive thing," I responded. "This is sustainable living in its highest form." She offered that chilly smile once more. "I meant harmony with the community, Mason. We prefer for things to run smoothly around here." The way she stressed "smoothly" sent a shiver down my spine, but I was still naive enough to believe she was just a quirky neighbor who was overly zealous about HOA regulations. The granite rim shone in the afternoon light. The LED system cast beautiful patterns underwater, and I proudly showed her the smartphone app that allowed me to view real-time readings of pH, temperature, and purity. My phone displayed every metric like a vital signs monitor for water. Yet, instead of appreciating the innovation, Meredith stood there with her arms crossed, her expression shifting from admiration to something that looked very much like jealousy. "Very impressive. She remarked in a tone that made it clear it was not a compliment. I'm sure all this technology makes you feel quite special. It's not about feeling special, I said, becoming defensive. It's about sustainability and water independence. This system could be a model for other homes in the community. That was evidently the wrong thing to say, as her smile grew even colder. Independence, she repeated slowly. That's a curious word choice. Here in Riverside Heights, we believe in interdependence, community standards, and working together toward common goals. The way she pronounced independence made it sound like a vulgarity. As she was leaving, she turned back with that same frozen smile and said, "Oh, Mason, there's an HOA meeting next week. You should really attend." The way she said it made me realize it was not a friendly suggestion, but a warning. I watched her return to her immaculate house, observing how she kept glancing back at my well with an expression I couldn't decipher. Her house was perfect, sterile, and identical to every other house on the block, except for the expensive landscaping that likely cost more than most people's cars. Had I known then what I know now, I would have started recording every interaction from that point on, because Meredith Sloan was on the verge of turning my peaceful new life into 6 months of pure hell, all because I had dared to build something beautiful and independent in her meticulously controlled little kingdom. The HOA meeting took place in the community center, a bland, beige room that seemed to strip all personality from the air. I arrived expecting the typical dull conversations about landscaping budgets and mailbox upkeep. Instead, I found myself in what felt like a meticulously planned ambush. Meredith stood at the front of the room holding a thick folder, that same cold smile fixed on her face, addressing about 20 homeowners who all seemed to be avoiding eye contact with me. "Before we move to our regular agenda," she announced, "I am pleased to present some important new community guidelines that were approved last week." My stomach sank as she started to read from a list of 15 new regulations. "Before we begin tonight's agenda, I want to announce our new community standards that were just approved." Meredith read each line as if she were verbally assaulting my property. The lights, the plants, even the well itself, everything was a target. Each new rule felt like a personal attack disguised as a community improvement, specifically crafted to dismantle everything I had built. The room was utterly silent except for Meredith's voice, and I realized with dawning horror that everyone present knew exactly what was happening. I stood up, attempting to keep my voice steady and professional. "Excuse me, but I must object to these retroactive regulations. When I bought my home and built my well, I adhered to all existing HOA guidelines and secured the necessary permits from the county. Establishing new rules to specifically target projects that are already complete seems problematic." I looked around the room, searching for support, but what I saw made my heart sink. An elderly man stared down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. A middle-aged woman turned her face away entirely. A younger couple suddenly found their phones fascinating. I scanned the room again, hoping for just one person to speak up, but the silence was overpowering. Not a single person defended me. No one questioned the blatant targeting. In that moment, I understood. They didn't agree with Meredith's actions, but their fear of her outweighed their outrage at the injustice. Meredith's smile widened, like a shark detecting blood in the water. "I appreciate your concerns, Mason, but we must ensure that everything in our community remains safe and appropriate. I'm sure you understand." The pause she took before saying appropriate made it clear that my well was anything but in her view. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly disturbed by what was happening but too intimidated to object. Safe. I couldn't stop my voice from rising slightly. "I'm a licensed civil engineer with full insurance coverage. This is professional-grade work that surpasses all safety standards. My well system is likely safer than the municipal water supply." I took out my phone to display the monitoring data, but Meredith waved her hand dismissively. "I don't question your expertise," she replied smoothly. "But regulations are for everyone's benefit. No one receives special treatment, regardless of their professional background." The way she said professional background made it sound as if I were some amateur showing off. "These regulations were created after I finished my project," I pressed, my frustration mounting. "This is clearly targeted, and frankly, it feels like harassment." The room's temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees as Meredith's composure finally cracked a little. Her perfect smile wavered for an instant, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "A bit paranoid, aren't we, Mason?" she said with a small laugh that no one joined. We are simply trying to maintain the beautiful, cohesive community we've all worked so hard to create. Surely you want to be a good neighbor and work with us, not against us. The implied threat in her words was unmistakable, and I realized I was dealing with someone who had transformed HOA management into her personal fiefdom. What used to be acceptable doesn't always meet our current standards, she continued. Communities evolve, Mason, and so must you. She gestured around the room as if speaking for everyone, but I noticed that several residents looked deeply uneasy about being included in her royal we. The meeting went on for another hour, addressing mundane topics like trash pickup schedules and holiday decorations, but I couldn't concentrate on anything but the growing awareness that I had somehow made an enemy without even trying. Every time someone asked a question about routine maintenance or community events, Meredith would glance my way with that same calculating look, as if already plotting her next move against me. After everyone had left, I approached Meredith directly, hoping a private conversation could lead to a reasonable compromise. Look, I don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I just want to live peacefully and work on my projects. Can we find a way to work this out? She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, making me wait for her reply like a petitioner seeking an audience with a monarch. Of course we can work it out, Mason, she said finally, her voice laced with false sweetness. All you have to do is follow the rules like everyone else. It's really that simple. But these rules didn't exist when I built the well, I stated, making a final appeal to basic fairness. You can't just change the rules retroactively to target one person's property. She looked at me with the kind of condescending expression one reserves for a particularly slow child. The community evolves, Mason. Our standards must evolve too. I'm sure a smart engineer like you can figure out how to adapt. The way she said adapt made it clear she meant complete surrender. I left that meeting certain I was in for a fight, but I still held on to the belief that reason and documentation would win. After all, I had permits, insurance, professional credentials, and a well that was objectively beneficial. I was so wrong. When I arrived home that night, I discovered the first violation notice stuck to my front door. Violation: unauthorized electronic decoration visible from street. Fine: $75 per day until corrected. They were targeting my solar panel, a piece of equipment that was both functional and environmentally sound. I stared at the bright red notice and understood that Meredith Sloan had no interest in reasonable compromise. She wanted total submission. The war for my independence had officially begun. What came next was the most frustrating month of my adult life. Meredith initiated a systematic campaign of harassment presented as community standards enforcement. Every day brought a new violation notice, each one more absurd than the one before. I was fined for towels, tomatoes, and trash bins. Every minor action became a new infraction. Meanwhile, my neighbor's holiday lights remained up all summer without a single notice. The pattern became obvious very quickly. Meredith was inspecting my property with a measuring tape and a magnifying glass, searching for any possible violation while ignoring identical or worse issues at other homes. I began documenting everything with photos and timestamps, compiling a case file that demonstrated the clear targeting. My neighbor directly across the street had Christmas lights up year-round, a violation of at least 3 HOA rules, yet never received a notice. The house next to his had a garden twice the size of mine with vegetables growing right up to the property line, but that was apparently fine. In the meantime, I was fined $75 for hanging a single towel to dry and $100 for tomatoes that were technically 6 inches too close to my fence. By the end of the third week, my fines totaled over $1,200, all for violations so trivial they would have been overlooked at any reasonable property. I tried contacting the HOA management company, hoping to find a rational person, but was informed that all enforcement decisions were handled by the community president, giving Meredith absolute control over my life. I consulted a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes, but he declined my case after a phone call he described as a conversation with someone who understands the local landscape very well. It was then I realized Meredith's influence reached far beyond our small community. As the ex-wife of a prominent Denver lawyer, she had connections throughout the legal and business worlds. People who would normally challenge such blatant harassment were suddenly finding reasons to stay out of it. It was like watching a masterclass in abusing a system meant to uphold community standards. Each day brought new, creative interpretations of rules that seemed to apply only to my property, while Meredith maintained her sweet, concerned neighbor persona in front of other residents. The turning point occurred when I saw Mrs. Peterson, my elderly next-door neighbor, slipping a handwritten note into my mailbox late one evening. She glanced around nervously before speaking to me. "Be careful, dear," she whispered. "She has a plan for your well." I heard her on the phone with someone about environmental concerns and emergency measures. The note she left was even more direct. "She's been researching ways to have your well declared a contamination risk. I think she's found something that will let her force you to shut it down. Please be careful." Mrs. Peterson had lived in the community for 15 years and had never witnessed such systematic targeting of a single resident. I began to take Meredith's behavior more seriously and started researching HOA law and property rights in Colorado. What I learned was both alarming and informative. HOA boards have immense power to enforce their rules, but they also have a legal duty to treat all residents fairly and base their decisions on legitimate community interests. Meredith's obvious targeting and retroactive rulemaking could potentially be contested, but only if I could prove a pattern of harassment and document her true motives. The issue was that she was clever enough to conceal her real agenda behind official-sounding language about community standards and safety. Then I discovered something that changed the entire situation. While researching municipal water regulations, I came across the city contract that supplied water to our whole community. Hidden in the technical jargon was a clause that drew my attention. Service agreement subject to review and potential suspension in cases of verified environmental violations or community noncompliance with municipal standards. It was a standard legal safeguard allowing the city to cut off service if a community was found to be violating environmental regulations or misrepresenting its water usage. That's when I understood Meredith's real plan. If she could concoct some sort of environmental emergency related to my well, she could not only force me to shut it down, but also cast herself as the hero who saved the community from a dangerous neighbor. That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the violation notices scattered across my desk, trying to devise a way to fight back against someone who seemed to hold all the cards. The next morning, I would find out just how far Meredith was willing to go to win her war against my independence. Looking out my window, I could see her house lit up like a holiday display with landscape lighting that clearly violated the minimal exterior illumination rule she had used to find me for my well's LED system. The hypocrisy was astonishing, but what truly concerned me was the way she kept walking past my property at various times of day, always with that same calculating expression. Mrs. Peterson was right. Meredith was planning something significant, and I had a sinking feeling that my beautiful well was about to become the epicenter of a battle I was not ready to fight. The violation notices continued to arrive like clockwork: improper mailbox positioning, unauthorized window coverings, non-approved outdoor furniture arrangement. Each fine was meticulously calculated to remain just under the amount that would trigger an automatic legal review, but together they were designed to either bankrupt me or force me to surrender. I understood that Meredith wasn't just targeting my well. She was attempting to make my entire existence in Riverside Heights so unbearable that I would have no option but to sell my house and leave. But she had made a critical error in judgment. I was an engineer who understood systems, and I was about to use her own system against her in ways she could never have anticipated. I was awakened at 6:30 in the morning by the sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my bedroom window. Initially, I dismissed it as road construction or utility work, a common occurrence in any neighborhood. But as I grew more awake, I realized the noise was originating from my own front yard. I quickly dressed and rushed outside to find 2 concrete trucks parked in my driveway and 3 workers in hard hats standing around my well. My beautiful, granite-rimmed well was now covered in plastic sheeting and marked with a bright yellow "Danger, Do Not Approach" sign that looked official enough to deceive anyone unfamiliar with the situation. "What the hell is happening here?" I yelled, running towards the workers who were already preparing their pumping equipment. The crew chief, a weathered man in his 50s, looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me a clipboard with official-looking documents. "Sorry, sir, but we have orders from the HOA to perform emergency environmental remediation. This well has been reported as a potential contamination source, and we're required to seal it immediately." My hands trembled as I scanned the paperwork, which included phrases like groundwater contamination risk, immediate public health threat, and emergency action authorized by community safety protocols. "This is insane," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "This well is cleaner than city water. I have test results, monitoring data, and professional certifications. This is completely fabricated. The crew chief shrugged apologetically. Look, I don't make the decisions. I just follow orders. We have permits from the county health department and authorization from your HOA board. If you have an issue with it, you'll need to address it with them. He pointed to a county vehicle parked across the street, where an official was documenting the remediation process with photos and forms. I took out my phone and began recording everything, knowing that documentation would be essential if I had any chance of fighting this blatant setup. The workers moved with practiced efficiency, extending the concrete pump's hose and positioning it directly over my well's opening. You can't do this without my permission, I protested. This is my property. The county official approached with a clipboard and a badge that made the entire situation feel depressingly legitimate. Actually, sir, in the case of a verified public health emergency, we have the authority to take immediate action. The HO filed a complaint with documented evidence of contamination risk, and our testing confirmed elevated levels of concerning substances. What testing? I demanded. No one has tested my water except for me, and I have documentation proving it exceeds all safety standards. The official appeared uncomfortable but adhered to his script. I'm sorry, sir, but we have to err on the side of public safety. You can request a hearing to contest the findings, but the remediation must proceed immediately. I realized with growing dread that Meredith had somehow fabricated test results and convinced county officials that my well was a genuine threat. The entire situation was a masterclass in bureaucratic manipulation, using official channels to carry out what was essentially pure vandalism. The concrete trucks started their pumps, and I watched, powerless, as they began to fill my engineering marvel with liquid cement. 25 feet of carefully planned depth vanished under an avalanche of gray concrete that would solidify into permanent destruction. I continued to record, capturing every moment of the process while attempting to argue with officials who seemed genuinely convinced they were protecting public safety. The whole operation took less than 2 hours, transforming my beautiful, functional well into an unsightly concrete monument to Meredith's ruthlessness. And then, just as the last of the concrete was being poured, Meredith herself appeared, walking across my lawn with the same sweet smile she had worn during our first encounter. "Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "I know how proud you were of your little project, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." I was so furious I could hardly speak, but I managed to keep recording as she continued her act. "I hope you understand that we couldn't risk contaminating the groundwater for the entire neighborhood. I'm sure you'll appreciate having clean, safe city water like the rest of us. You fabricated this entire emergency," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You know as well as I do that my well was perfectly safe. This is harassment, pure and simple." Meredith's mask slipped just a fraction, revealing a glimpse of the cold calculation beneath her neighborly demeanor. "That's a very serious accusation, Mason. I hope you're not suggesting that county health officials would participate in some kind of conspiracy. That sounds almost paranoid." She emphasized the word paranoid in the same way she had at the HOA meeting, as if diagnosing a mental condition. "What I'm suggesting," I replied, still recording, "is that you've made the biggest mistake of your life." She laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "A mistake? I think I've solved a problem that was making everyone in the neighborhood uncomfortable. Now you can join the rest of civilized society and use municipal water like a normal person." The county official and the concrete crew were packing up, leaving behind a yard that looked like a construction site and a concrete plug where my pride and joy had stood just hours earlier. That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the footage I had captured, replaying Meredith's performance. Her words echoed in my mind. Now you can join the rest of civilized society. She believed she had won, that she had crushed my spirit and forced me into submission like any other difficult resident. But Meredith Sloan had made one critical miscalculation. She had targeted an engineer who understood exactly how systems worked, including the system that supplied her perfect little community with water. As I began researching municipal water contracts and environmental compliance regulations, I started to form a plan that would give her a taste of her own medicine. The following days were a whirlwind of research, phone calls, and meticulous planning. I knew that Meredith had used fabricated environmental concerns to destroy my well, which meant she had filed false reports with county officials and likely committed fraud. More importantly, I realized that her concocted contamination emergency could be the very thing to turn the tables on her entire operation. I spent hours sifting through municipal records and city contracts, searching for any leverage against someone who seemed to control every official channel in our community. That's when I found the key, buried in the fine print of Riverside Heights' water service agreement with Colorado Springs. Buried in the fine print was a powerful clause, one fraudulent pollution claim, and the city could terminate the water supply. Not just maybe, but instantly. It was designed to shield the city from liability if a community was found to be misrepresenting environmental conditions or filing false safety reports. Meredith's fake contamination report wasn't just harassment. It was precisely the kind of false environmental reporting that could trigger a service suspension. I realized I needed a strategic approach. Accusing her of harassment would be my word against hers, and she had already demonstrated her skill at manipulating official channels. But if I could get her to admit on record that she had fabricated the contamination report, I would have irrefutable evidence of fraud that the city could not ignore. I needed to make her feel secure enough to boast about her victory, confident enough to disclose how she had executed her master plan. The challenge was to create a scenario where she would incriminate herself without knowing she was being recorded. I decided to invite her over for what I termed a peace negotiation. I sent her a text message stating that I was prepared to discuss reasonable compromises and hoped we could find a way to move forward as good neighbors. Her reply arrived within minutes. Of course, Mason. I've always believed that reasonable people can work things out. How about tomorrow afternoon in your backyard? The speed of her response and the exclamation points told me all I needed to know. She was eager to savor her victory and likely curious to see how completely she had broken my spirit. That evening, I carefully arranged recording equipment around my patio. I placed a small camera inside a decorative planter and a backup audio recorder inside my outdoor speaker system. I wanted multiple angles and redundant recordings in case of any technical failures. This was no longer about revenge. It was about documentation and justice. Meredith had used the system to destroy my property through fraud and manipulation. I was going to use the same system to hold her accountable. The next afternoon, she arrived punctually, wearing a flowing sundress and carrying a bottle of expensive wine as if we were old friends meeting for a social chat. Mason, she said warmly, giving me an air kiss as if we hadn't been locked in psychological warfare for months. I'm so glad you reached out. I've been hoping we could put all this unpleasantness behind us. She settled into a patio chair, looking completely at ease and confident, like a general surveying a conquered territory. I have to admit, I said, playing my part carefully, you really outmaneuvered me with the whole environmental thing. I never saw that coming. Her eyes lit up with genuine pleasure at the compliment. Well, sometimes you have to think creatively when dealing with difficult situations. I've learned that people respond better to official authority than to simple requests. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned back in her chair, clearly relishing the chance to explain her brilliance to her defeated opponent. How did you even know to use environmental concerns? I asked, affecting the tone of an impressed student learning from a master. That was incredibly effective. Meredith practically beamed at the praise. Oh, Mason, you'd be amazed what you can accomplish when you understand how these systems work. I've been involved in community management for years, and I've learned that environmental safety is the one thing that makes officials act immediately. No questions asked. She took a sip of wine and continued. All it took was one phone call to a friend who knows how to write convincing reports. A friend, I prompted, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart pounded with excitement. That's genius. So, the contamination report was. She waved her hand dismissively. $500 to someone who knows how to make things sound official and scary. Worth every penny for the results. She gestured toward the concrete plug where my well used to be. Sometimes you have to invest in solutions, And honestly, the whole thing was probably illegal anyway. Private wells in established communities always create complications. I could hardly contain my excitement as she continued to incriminate herself. The best part, she said, warming to her topic, is that everyone thinks I'm the hero who protected the neighborhood from a dangerous situation. They have no idea how easy it was to manufacture the whole crisis. She laughed, clearly delighted with her own cleverness. You had to know that having your own water source made everyone else feel inadequate, like you were showing off or something. Nobody wants to live next to someone who thinks they're better than the rest of us. So, this was really about the well making me stand out too much? I asked, giving her the chance to fully incriminate herself. Oh, absolutely, she replied without hesitation. If I let one person have their own private water source, pretty soon, everyone would want one. Then, Who would pay for the municipal water system? The whole community structure would fall apart. I had to nip that in the bud before it became a trend. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast to community standards and the people who enforce them. As she left that afternoon, still glowing with satisfaction from her confession, I sat on my patio reviewing the perfect footage I had captured. Meredith had just given me everything I needed to destroy her credibility and potentially face criminal charges for filing false reports. More importantly, she had given me the leverage to turn her own weapon against her. That evening, I called the Colorado Springs Water Department and asked to speak with someone about reporting a serious violation of their service contract. I need to report fraudulent environmental claims that may have compromised the integrity of your community service agreements, I told the supervisor. And I have video evidence to support my claims. Within 48 hours of my call to the water department, everything changed. I had submitted Meredith's recorded confession along with a detailed written complaint documenting the pattern of harassment and fraudulent reporting. The city took false environmental claims very seriously, especially when they involved manipulating county health officials and potentially exposing the municipality to liability. By Thursday morning, every house in Riverside Heights had received an official notice. Water Service temporarily suspended pending investigation of contract violations and false reporting. Estimated restoration pending resolution of investigation. The first call came at 7:15 in the morning, then another at 7:20. By 8 o'clock, my phone was ringing incessantly with panicked neighbors demanding to know what was happening and why they suddenly had no water for showers, coffee, or basic daily needs. The beauty of it was that I had nothing to do with the decision. I had simply reported documented fraud to the proper authorities and let the system function exactly as intended. Meredith had weaponized environmental regulations against me, and now those same regulations were being used to hold the entire community accountable for her deception. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that evening, and the community center was filled with angry, unwashed residents who had spent the day dealing with life without running water. I arrived early and set up my laptop and a portable projector, knowing this would be my one chance to present the evidence clearly. The atmosphere in the room was tense with frustration and confusion, as most people were still unsure what had caused the water shutdown. Meredith sat in the front row, looking pale and shaken, but still attempting to project an air of composure and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice slightly strained, "we're dealing with an unfortunate situation that appears to be the result of a misunderstanding with the city water department. I'm confident we can resolve this quickly once we clarify a few administrative details." She was trying to frame the crisis as a bureaucratic error, something that could be resolved with the right phone calls. But I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized her carefully controlled world was collapsing. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, feeling dozens of frustrated eyes on me. "Actually, there's no misunderstanding," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. "The water was shut off because the city discovered that false environmental reports were filed against my property, which constitutes fraud and violates the community's service contract." A murmur spread through the crowd as people began to grasp that this was not a simple administrative mistake. "What I'm about to show you," I continued, "is video footage of our HOA president admitting that she paid $500 to someone who knows how to make things sound official and scary. Worth every penny for the results." You could have heard a pin drop as the recording continued, capturing her casual admission of fraud and her satisfaction at manufacturing a crisis. When the video ended, the room erupted. People shouted questions, demanded explanations, and expressed outrage at being dragged into Meredith's personal feud. "You lied to all of us," yelled one neighbor. "My kids couldn't take baths last night because of your fake emergency," shouted another. Mrs. Peterson stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "You made us all accomplices in your harassment campaign. We trusted you to protect our community, and instead, you put everyone at risk." Meredith desperately tried to regain control, standing and raising her hands for quiet. "Now let's all calm down and think about this rationally," she said, her voice trembling. "Mason has obviously edited this recording to make it sound worse than it was. We can't base important decisions on potentially manipulated evidence." But the crowd was not convinced, especially when I played the recording again, showing the unedited footage with timestamps and metadata clearly visible. "I move that we vote immediately to remove Meredith Sloan as HOA president," called out one homeowner. "Seconded," came voices from around the room. The vote was swift and decisive, 48 in favor of removal, with only Meredith voting against. She sat alone in the front row as the community she had terrorized turned against her, finally understanding the extent of her deception. But the community also needed immediate action to restore their water. "Mason," said Mrs. Peterson, "you understand these systems better than any of us. Can you help us fix this mess?" I had anticipated this and had an action plan ready. I've already contacted the water department and provided them with evidence that the false reports came from one individual acting without community authorization, I explained. They're willing to restore service within 24 hours once we submit a formal disavowal of Meredith's actions and commit to full cooperation with their investigation. The paperwork was drafted and signed that night, with Meredith's signature conspicuously absent. As people left the meeting, many stopped to apologize for not speaking up during the months of harassment. "We should have said something," admitted one neighbor. "We all knew what she was doing was wrong, but nobody wanted to be her next target." As the room emptied, Meredith sat alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her authority. She looked up at me with an expression of pure hatred and hissed, "This isn't over, Mason. I'll sue you. I'll sue the community. I'll sue everyone involved." But her threats sounded hollow and desperate. "Good luck with that," I replied calmly. "Everything I did was legal and documented. Can you say the same?" The next morning, I woke to the sound of water flowing through the pipes again. True to their word, the city had restored service to Riverside Heights. I stood in my kitchen, listening to the familiar sound and feeling a deep satisfaction that was not about revenge, but about justice finally being served. The community had learned a valuable lesson about unchecked authority, and Meredith was about to learn that actions have consequences. Within a week, the legal repercussions mounted. The county health department launched an investigation into the false contamination report, which could lead to criminal charges. The city water department pursued civil penalties for contract violations and the costs of the emergency service suspension. For the community, the most significant outcome was that Meredith was required to pay $15,000 in compensation for my destroyed well, plus funds to cover the community's legal fees. The financial penalties, however, were minor compared to the social fallout. Riverside Heights had a 30-day notice requirement for major changes, and Meredith was essentially forced to put her house on the market. Word of her deception had spread, making it impossible for her to maintain any credibility. The neighbors who had once greeted her politely now turned away or glared openly. The charity organizations she once led now wanted nothing to do with her. I used the compensation money to hire a professional drilling company to create a new, even better well. This one was deeper, had an expanded filtration system, and included a backup solar array that could power multiple households. Instead of keeping it for myself, I designed the system with multiple access points, allowing my immediate neighbors to connect for emergency water or simply because they preferred the cleaner taste. Mrs. Peterson was the first to connect, and soon 2 other families followed. What began as Meredith's attempt to enforce conformity had created a small network of neighbors who were now more self-sufficient and connected than ever. The investigation into Meredith's actions uncovered a pattern of abuse that went beyond my case. Other residents shared stories of selective enforcement and intimidation. The county attorney's office was building a case that could result in serious criminal charges. Meredith's attempts to hire powerful legal representation were hampered by the fact that her ex-husband's law firm refused her case, and other attorneys were hesitant to defend someone with such clear video evidence against them. 6 months later, I received an email that brought a smile to my face. The subject was information regarding applicant Meredith Sloan, and it came from an HOA management company in Denver where she had apparently tried to start over. Attached was the video from our community meeting and a simple note: "Thought you should know what kind of person is applying for our board position." Her application was rejected immediately. The irony was that Meredith's attempt to destroy my independence had strengthened my position in the community and created the innovative, collaborative neighborhood she had tried to prevent. On a warm summer evening, I was sitting by the new well with Mrs. Peterson and other neighbors, watching children play as we discussed plans for a community greenhouse. The LED lights in the well cast their familiar glow. "You know," Mrs. Peterson said, "Meredith thought she was protecting property values by keeping everything the same, but this community is worth more now than it ever was when she was in charge." She was right. The innovative water system, the collaborative spirit, and the reputation for standing up to bullies had made Riverside Heights a desirable place to live. Property values had risen, but more importantly, the quality of life had improved. As I sat there, listening to the sounds of a healthy community, I realized Meredith had inadvertently done me a favor. Her attacks had forced me to become more engaged, creative, and committed to the principles that make communities thrive. Sometimes the best response to those who try to tear you down is to build something better. I took a picture of the well, surrounded by laughing children and content neighbors. Looking up at the stars, I said quietly, "Thanks for the lesson, Meredith." Sometimes the best way to deal with people who want to control everything is to show them what freedom actually looks like.